Okay, who would like to start with the questions?
Yeah, hi. I have a question.
Yes.
Last time you said that even if you're fully awakened, if you're an arahant, you still have formations, but the formations don't have like unwholesome loads anymore that lead to like more accumulation of karma. But even an arahant still has formations, and these formations activate a consciousness, right?
Yes.
So my question is, to avoid rebirth, if you're fully awakened, so your formations are like free of karma and free of craving, so you can avoid rebirth. But then, if an if an arahant still has formations that lead to consciousness, so why is it impossible for an arahant to be reborn? And also, if he chooses to be reborn, for example, he would like to keep teaching the Dhamma as a human, could he do so?
Okay, let me answer the second question first.
Okay.
No, because there's no more clinging to the Dhamma. The arahant doesn't even have any clinging to or attachment to the Dhamma itself. You're going back to the simile of the raft, where you use the raft to come from one shore to the other shore. Once you're at the other shore, you don't carry on the raft, even if it's for other people. So the arahant has just made a complete, let's say, destruction of any kind of personal self or any belief in a personal self that includes conceit. The arahant doesn't even have a wish to teach. The arahant is guided and motivated by wisdom, guided and motivated by compassion, but they have no inclination to teach unless somebody asks a question. In other words, they're not out there to be preachers and things like that. They're just there. One of the quotes that Sariputta has is, I wait for, and I'm paraphrasing, I wait for my death like a man waits for his wages. But that doesn't mean he's looking for his death. He's just saying that there's nothing left to do. And so he teaches because people ask him to teach. And he's guided by that compassion for people who want to know the Dhamma. But his own attachment to the Dhamma is no longer present. The attachment to the Dhamma is therefore the anagami, and therefore they still have more work to do because they still see the Dhamma as self. They still see the Dhamma as affecting a self. Whereas for the Arahant, there is no more self in anything, including the Dhamma, including Nibbana itself. So if an Arahant is teaching, they're not getting anything out of it, and they have no inclination to help others in the sense that they're personally invested in it. People ask and they clarify situations, they clarify understanding for the Dhamma, and then they go on their way and let people do their own practice. Everybody is responsible for their own practice. So that sense of somebody wanting to become or wanting to be reborn again in another life so that they can continue teaching, that's more in alignment with the bodhisattva ideal. But as we understand in Theravada Buddhism, the bodhisattva ideal is for those who strive on to become Buddhas, and it takes a long, long, long time. We're talking like incalculable years. That's mahakapas, as they say. And the idea is, well, the Buddha was around 2,500 years ago. And the bodhisattva ideal is that once I become a Buddha, I will then liberate everybody. In other words, I will not look for liberation until everybody else is liberated. But that is a misguided view, because you think about the Buddha, he did not liberate everybody. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So that's the answer to your second question. The first question, which is about formations and the arahant. The formations always arise regardless of whether you are liberated or unliberated or whatever it might be. As we said before, the difference is that there's no more craving in there. So you think about, how does this process of rebirth actually happen? It's craving. Craving is the foundation for rebirth. In the case of the arahant, even though formations arise, what are these formations that are arising? They're pure formations in the form of verbal formations, physical formations, and mental formations. You need formations, or in other words, in order for the mind to function, formations are necessary. Mental formations allow the mind to feel and perceive. Verbal formations allow the mind to think and express in speech. And physical formations allow the mind or the body to basically breathe and move and so on. So if anybody was said to be without any formations, then they are ultimately dead. They're no longer living in that sense. So for the arahant, the difference is here. Let's go back to the person who has some craving. When they die, there will be something that arises in the way of their formations in terms of some kind of image or visuals or memories or ideas or concepts, things that cause the mind to incline towards those images, cause the mind to have a reaction to it. And so when there's a reaction, there is craving, there is a thinking about it, there is craving. And so that gives rise to other formations that activate a consciousness. That consciousness then takes those formations and transports them into a new mentality, materiality of the new life. But in the case of the arahant, because there is no more craving present, any formations that arise will not be clung to. There is no engagement with anything. There's non-reaction. So the mind of the arahant is non-reactive. Therefore, there won't be a new consciousness. There's an example of this in the suttas about an arahant or a person named Vakali. And when he did become an arahant, he did so just at the point of death. And people, including the Buddha, were looking up where he was at what was called, I think, the Vulture's Peak. And there was black smoke everywhere. And the Buddha said, "You see that smoke there, monks? That smoke is Mara looking for the consciousness of Vakali, but unable to find it because he had no more craving." So the consciousness that arises in the arahant as well is known as this non-reflective consciousness. If there's pure formations, there's also pure consciousness. Consciousness doesn't mean that it's something that that's this, ephemeral or ethereal sort of soul or things like that. It's just awareness. It's just a cognizing of the six sense bases. So in order to function in this world, in order for the aggregates to continue functioning, one of the aggregates is consciousness, the awareness of what the experience is arising and passing away. So in the case of the arahant, when that consciousness arises, it's just cognizing what's happening. And that gives rise to a certain kind of contact, which is pure, which means there's no sense of I am or craving in that contact, nor will there be any sense of craving in that feeling and perception. And so whatever arises in the way of feeling and perception, that is the old karma that arises. And the arahant has no reaction to it. Because there's no reaction to it, there are no underlying tendencies towards craving, aversion, or any of the other underlying tendencies and feeling that link it to craving. And therefore, there is no more craving, there is no more clinging, there's no more being. That consciousness that arises in the day-to-day life of the arahant is just for the purpose of cognizing, just for the purpose of understanding, just for the purpose of interacting and experiencing the world. But because it's not fettered by any craving or conceit or ignorance, it's not liable to produce further craving or clinging or being.
Okay, thanks.
Does it make sense? Is it clear?
Yeah, it makes sense. I just had the idea that it sounded all like consciousness is something very negative, that because if you create a consciousness after death, then you will be reborn, that is suffering. And that just made me think about, but an arahant still has a consciousness. And if he would conceive another consciousness at his hour of death, it also would be pure and that wouldn't be suffering. So why couldn't he be reborn? That was like more or less the idea that I had. But you say that an arahant would never be reborn, so to speak.
The reason why is because, okay, so we have to understand this distinction. When we talk about the consciousness of an arhat, we also have to understand that it's the consciousness that's arising and passing away in every second. It's not the same consciousness that arises and passes away, but it's different consciousnesses that arise and pass away in day-to-day life. And the arhat is seeing, when they're listening, when they're smelling, using any of the six sense bases, when they're cognizing, there's a consciousness tied to that individual experience. And it's happening millions and millions of times per second. But when we talk about on the lifetime to lifetime level, on the macro level, what we're saying here is, yes, there is no more consciousness that arises because there's no intention, there's no inclination towards something in the way of remorse or regret, in the way of craving or an interest in something, in wanting to be something. And so for that reason, there won't be any new consciousness that arises. So I think the distinction has to be made here is when we talk about these two things, the consciousness on the day-to-day level arises and passes away in every second, millions of times per second. And the consciousness that is there at the point of the dissolution of the body is the
Yeah.
final consciousness of the arahant, because there won't be any craving in that consciousness to cause it to continue causing a further rebirth.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Maybe to add, a being is per definition a being that experiences craving. An arahant would not even really be a being because they already escaped the wheel of samsara.
Yes, so that's a very good point. I mean, the definition of being, as you said, the satta, is a being who has identification with one or more of the five aggregates. So saying that this body is me, mine, or myself, saying the experiences or the perception of those experiences, me, mine, or myself, including the feelings, or saying even the intentions and the formations that arise, saying that this is me, mine, or myself. And then finally seeing this awareness itself, that means the cognizing of the experience, the understanding and awareness of the experience is me, mine, and myself. There is said to be a being. That is the definition of a being. But if you have let go of all sense of self, if you have let go of all sense of taking things personally, if you have let go of craving, conceit, and ignorance, then where is the being by that definition? The arahant is neither a being nor a non-being, because if you say you're a non-being, then it would mean there was a being to begin with. It gets really paradoxical, just to keep it simplified. There's no notion that these aggregates are mine. And because of that, there is no fuel. There's no karmic fuel in the aggregates. And for that reason, there's no fuel for further rebirth.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a question. Continue with regard to arahant. So, like certain people, when they do some meditation, then they find that they have some equanimity, or they say they don't have desire to certain things. How is that different from the arahant types of equanimity? If, let's say, they've been served with cakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, an arhat can still enjoy cake. There's nothing wrong with enjoying cake. There's nothing wrong with enjoying apple pie or any other delicious food. But the difference is the arhat sees that as being impersonal, sees that, you know, when you're really enjoying, you can really enjoy in that moment whatever is being experienced. But the issue here is when there's craving involved and when that cake is taken away and the mind is no longer equanimous because of it and agitated because of it. That's the craving. That's the suffering that arises. So the equanimity that you're talking about, that you experience, for example, in the fourth jhana, or the equanimity that's taken as an object, or equanimity as an enlightenment factor, is one of the parts and parcels, let's say, of the arahat's mindset. The only difference is that equanimity is always there. Whereas for the untrained mind or for the unliberated mind, it takes time to automate that process so that the natural state includes equanimity. So in other words, the enlightenment factors that are there that we know of, that the 7 enlightenment factors of what are used to balance in the 8th jhana, and what is basically first and foremost mindfulness, and then the investigation of states, which is to perceive what is happening. The energy that arises because of that, the effort that one makes, that is the right effort. The joy that arises, the tranquility that arises, the collectedness and equanimity, these are all parts of the natural state of the arahant. That's why they are known as the enlightenment factors. This is the enlightened mind, so to speak. This is the awakened mind, so to speak. So the difference is really, it has become, let's say, stuck, or it has become permanent in the arahant's mind, so to speak. So there's no more equanimity and non-equanimity. There's always equanimity, and it can be brought up even further if the equanimity is required, or it can be brought up even further if loving kindness is required or compassion is required. So these things are present in the arahant's mind, but they're always present. That's really the difference.
That is also why Nibbana is called permanent, because in an unawakened being, whatever state there is, it arises and passes away. It doesn't stay, it doesn't stick. But with an arahant, it has arisen at some point, and it just stays that way. It doesn't fade, it doesn't pass away. And this is why it's said that Nibbana is a permanent state. It's not because they will live forever and ever, but it's because it's one state that arose and won't pass away again.
Yes. Yeah, and so Nibbana being that experience of having let go completely and seeing with wisdom and experiencing that bliss of Nibbana, that is available to the Arahat 24/7. They just need that intention of inclining the mind towards it, which means that, as Sil said, with the untrained mind or the fully unliberated mind, there is an experience of Nibbana. But right after that experience of Nibbana, there is an attachment to that experience of Nibbana. And so that causes the mind to deviate from there and then still personalize things or identify with things. But once there is a irreversible, unshakable freedom of the mind, that is the nature of the Arahat's mind, then that is the permanence that we're talking about. It's not, that's why it's called the deathless. There's no more there's no renewal of being. There's no more birth arising in the sense of new birth of action, new birth of karma. And so that is the deathless. And so the Arahat's mind, in that sense, is permanent. So as long as there is still present the 5 aggregates. Once the dissolution of the 5 aggregates are, there, then, there's no need to trace where the Arahat's mind is or isn't. Once you start to do that, then you're getting into the territory of self or not self, or is it or isn't it, and so on. All we know is that the mind of the Arahant is just perpetually happy. They are happy all the time. They're balanced all the time. Anything that arises doesn't shake their mind, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, I have a question about Nibbana also. Well, as I learned, like even in the very high realms, the beings in the very high realms that have lifespans that are incredibly large, I don't know, 20,000 mahakappas or so. I mean, that is unimaginable. But even their existence is limited. Even they are permanent, right?
Yeah,
so
they are impermanent. Yeah.
Impermanent. I mean, even they are impermanent. and they even their lifespan is so long that they even forget it, and they think they live forever, but they also are impermanent. But what is then with Nibbana? Is that also permanent or impermanent? What is there? What is there?
Yeah, see, the thing is, the line of questioning comes from the idea that Nibbana is some kind of space or realm. But Nibbana is more of an experience. It cannot be taken as an object. It cannot be taken to be said as a realm, even though sometimes it's equated as a realm because it's like an island unto oneself, as it's said, just be an island unto oneself. When we say Nibbana is permanent, we're talking about the fact that the Nibbana is unchanging. It's unconditioned. And because it's unconditioned, it's not dependent upon conditions. And all conditions being impermanent lead to arising and passing away, lead to dissolution. We can even extend this as far as saying for the Sotapanna, when they break the fetters of the belief in a personal self, when they break the fetter of doubt and the belief in rites and rituals, that the rites and rituals will lead to Nibbana, that's unshakable. That's irreversible. The experience of Nibbana, when we say is permanent, what we're saying is the experience is irreversible. Once you see that there is no permanent self, I mean, truly see it and truly understand it, there's no going back. And that's really what we mean by when we say unshakable or irreversible or permanent in that sense. So even the beings that experience these long lifespans, they lose sense of time. They lose sense of the idea that they too will pass on at one point in time. Forget about those beings. What about humans themselves? Humans live like as if they're going to be living on forever. The kinds of things that they do, the kinds of ways they act, the things they think, they have all of these plans and ideas and intentions as if they're going to be living forever, not knowing or not understanding or not realizing that perhaps the next moment could be their last. So for the arahant, that permanence mindset that we talk about is not the idea that I will be there forever, because the sense of I is completely gone. It's more about that state of the mind, which is irreversible. It can no longer go down, like for the Sotapanna, like for the Sakadagami, like for the Anagami. Once you have understood something, there's no way for you to go back from that understanding. It's as simple as, we go back to the other idea that in mathematics, you learn 2 + 2 is 4. Once you know 2 + 2 is 4 and somebody else tells you otherwise, they say 2 + 2 is 5, you know that not to be true. You just know it because you know it, and you won't mistake that 2 + 2 is 5. In the same way, for the arahat's mind or the Sotapanna's mind or any of the awakened beings, any of the beings at the different stages of awakening, once they have the knowledge and vision, to the extent that they have that knowledge and vision, it is irreversible. They will not be able to go back down. They won't be able to forget it necessarily. And then for the arahant, they have the full knowledge and vision, and so there is no more going back anywhere. There's no going back to this realm or that realm. There's no going back to an idea of a self or not self and things like that. It's just completely destroyed. And once it's destroyed, there's no forgetting it. There's no ignoring it. There's complete understanding and awareness of the Four Noble Truths in every moment. And so that complete understanding and awareness of the Four Noble Truths is also to that extent permanent. And when we say permanent, to the extent that that there is still present the 5 aggregates. So when one sees perception, when one sees feeling, one sees form, one sees consciousness, one sees intention or formations, one sees the truth of those things, which is that the Four Noble Truths are inherent in them, that there is suffering that can arise because of them, but that suffering is no longer taken to be oneself, and there is no more self that considers it to be permanent.
Yeah. I understand that the experience and the wisdom is forever. what I mean is like what happens with the existence, you know, like with an arahant who is now a human. He's now a human, and then he dies, his body dies. So and he's not going anywhere. He's not going to none of the realms. So what happens? Is he still existing, or where do his formations go? Is it like, is he dissolving, you know?
Yeah. This is these are the this is, what do you call it, the
Eternalist view.
Okay.
well, yeah, it's an eternalist view, but it's part of that whole line of questioning. You know, does the arhat exist after death? Does the arhat not exist after death? Does he both exist or not exist after death? Or does he neither exist nor not exist after death? None of these questions apply, because they're all coming from the sense of self. They're all coming from the idea that there's still some self for the arhat, and so there is still some kind of existence, so to speak. Simply put, what we understand is dependent origination. The arising of one thing causes the arising of another. Cessation of that is the cessation of the other. This is the middle way. This is the answer to that question. And the reason why it's the answer to that question is because what we're saying is, once you have ceased all, then there is no point of saying, is there a self or is there not a self? Because the self arises, or the sense of self arises, from the arising of different cofactors and the arising of different causes and conditions. When you take away those causes and conditions, the idea of self doesn't apply there. So for the arahant, they don't see it in these terms. They don't see it in these terms that, you know, is there a self? Is there not a self? Will I arise? Will I not arise after death? Will I not be? Will I be? All of this comes to be because of the different factors that lead to this idea of a self. And if those factors that lead to the idea of a self are not present in the arhat, then those questions as well will not be present in the arhat. As for seeing whether the arhat arises or passes away, whether they are existent or non-existent after death, and so on, that's something that just cannot be applied. It's something that is still coming from a sense of self. That's the thing.
Okay.
The sense of existence comes from a sense of self. So even if you say, okay, there's no self, then that means the arhat won't exist. That means there was a self to be there and then didn't exist afterwards. You see, it's very, very subtle thing.
It's a bit tricky, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But you'll get it when you become an arhat. You'll get it.
Okay, maybe this, maybe in 10,000 Mahakappas, who knows? But yeah.
Well, you never know.
Yeah, I have a question with regard to Nibbana also. Okay, before Buddha become enlightened, he also have reached the 8 jhanas, is it? Okay. So what is the difference? Why that the earlier jhanas is not lead to Nibbana and the next one leads to Nibbana? What's the difference? What's the determining factor?
I have to correct you there and say that from the first jhana you can attain Nibbana. There are a couple of suttas in, I think, the Samhita Nikaya or Anguttara Nikaya, where it says that one attains the first jhana, and then seeing this jhana as being impermanent and seeing all states that are conditioned being impermanent, there is the experience of dispassion and disillusionment and all the different factors that lead to cessation. And then experiencing cessation, one lets go and experiences Nibbana and can in fact experience arahatship also from the first jhana onwards. So this sense of cessation of perception and feeling can happen at any point in time. There are people who experience cessation from the fourth jhana onwards, but there are people who experience cessation from nothingness or even from infinite consciousness. When we talk about the Buddha's awakening, yes, the Buddha talks about going through each of the jhanas back and forth and being able to see each of them, being able to see the impermanence of them. But there's also the idea that the Buddha had the threefold knowledge. So he went to the fourth jhana and then went through his different lives and then saw dependent origination that way, started to see the arising and passing away of beings, and then saw the understanding of karma and rebirth. And through that, then experienced the destruction of the taints. And so experienced arahantship for himself, so to speak. What we also have to understand is that the fourth jhana is the fourth jhana. But when we also talk about the fourth jhana, it also means, or it could include within it, the arupa jhanas. So the fourth jhana being the basis for the realm of infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception and non-perception. I'll go a little further and talk about the different ways that one can attain Nibbana insofar as the different classification of people are there, the different classification of the different mindsets. There is that who is, there is one who is liberated by wisdom. And the one who is liberated by wisdom is one who has gone through the first four jhanas. So that is the form jhanas, and experienced Nibbana from the fourth jhana and then been liberated by wisdom. There is the bodily witness who can be either an untrained mind or who can be all the way up to the anagami, who has gone through each of the four jhanas as well as the formless realms, but has not destroyed the taints yet. And then there is one who is liberated in both ways. And this is somebody who has gone through each of the jhanas, gone through each of the arupa jhanas, experienced cessation, and also destroyed the taints. So let's say the pathway to Nibbana is manifold. There are different ways to do it, but there's always using the process of jhana in that sense. But from where you start off or where you end is dependent upon the mind and how much willing it is to let go and to not grasp. Does that make sense?
Could anyone attain Nibbana without jhana? Because I heard of the term vipassana saga. I don't know if I'm right, but
yeah, you're talking about the sukha vipassana. I was having a discussion with Bhante the other day about this, and he was talking about his understanding of it, and I inclined towards that understanding, which is the sukha vipassana or the sukha arahant. That's the dry arahant. Sukha here doesn't mean the comfort and the feeling of pleasure that one feels in sukha, but there's another word for sukha which means dry. And the reason is not because that they didn't go through the jhanas, but the reason is because their understanding of dependent origination is much deeper. So the vipassana that is being referred to here is the understanding of how these links arise and pass away to a deeper extent. And the one who is, let's say, not a sukha arahant is somebody who has a deeper level of sensitivity. So they have developed some level of psychic faculties. And so the two prime examples of this is Sariputta, who would be considered a dry arahant, so to speak, and Moggallana, who had some level of sensitivity. And so both had gone through the process of jhanas. The difference is one had psychic faculties and further sensitivity, and the other had more inclination to look deeper into dependent origination. But both will still have an understanding, a good understanding of dependent origination. But both also had jhana as the foundation for that understanding.
I have a question also about jhana.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there like a different kind of jhana, like a mundane jhana and arya jhana? An-arya jhana and arya jhana.
So there's a jhana that arises because of one-pointed concentration, where the mind is completely suppressed. And so that's the same experience of jhana. You'll experience the different factors of jhana. But the fruit of that jhana is you will experience for maybe a few hours, maybe even 3, 4, 5 hours, some bliss and some happiness and some joy from having attained that jhana. But there's no real wisdom or insight that arises from it. And so once that fades away, the hindrances that were suppressed with the mind being suppressed will arise, and there won't be any understanding of how to deal with those hindrances. That is the un-arya jhana, as you would put it. And so that un-arya jhana is that jhana which is one-pointed, or a result of one-pointed concentration. But the arya jhana is the jhana that we see in Majjhima Nikaya 111, Anupada Sutta, where Sariputta is able to discern that he is in this jhana and be able to discern the different factors of the jhana. Because in one-pointed concentration, you might be experiencing the different factors, but you just don't know it because you're so concentrated in your mind. Whereas if the mind is open and there's an open awareness, then that mind is able to see if hindrances arise and can immediately let go. And so mind is using insight right there and then through the 6R process to understand how suffering arises in the form of the hindrances and how to let it go using right effort, or the 6 R's, to come to the cessation of those hindrances or the cessation of suffering. And so that is Arya Jhana, where there is the right balance of samatha and the right balance of vipassana. That is to say, the right balance of a calm, collected mind with the right balance of understanding what is arising and passing away in every moment during that process of meditation.
Thank you.
I have a question. Like, is it possible that someone is due to, realize cessation, but because they get so excited about it, so Nibbana never arises? Could that happen? And if that happened, how can one not excited about it? Like, I think this is very hard. Yeah.
It's a very good question. So there are people who experience cessation and don't have the experience of Nibbana because they have a cessation experience as a result of one-pointed concentration. And so there won't be the right balance to be able to see what is happening. That's why when we're talking about this particular kind of practice, the TWIM practice, it's all about having the awareness and being able to see the insights that are arising. And that's exercising, that's training the mind. And we do further training where when you get into the 8th jhana, but I will say do it with every practice, every sit, every walking meditation that you do, is to reflect for a few seconds, maybe about 2 minutes, up to 2 minutes, 3 minutes, of what happened and whether there are things that you missed out. And if there were things that you missed out in the way of your attachments and things that were arising, you 6R that, especially in the 8th jhana, where it's very difficult to really process what's going on. When that happens, that gives a mind a deeper level of clarity and understanding. And so when there is a cessation experience, it's that same reflective mind that is able to see the links of dependent origination. So then from seeing the links of dependent origination, there is the experience of Nibbana. Whereas for one who is just a concentrated mind, there will be an experience of cessation, but when that arises, there might be excitement about it because they're expecting something, and that just shakes the mindfulness and that mindfulness's ability to be able to start to see the links and get that wisdom. And then before cessation, if somebody has already experienced cessation and then had the experience of Nibbana, I would argue that it's difficult the second time around for you to experience that cessation because now you have seen the map. Now you know the way to get there. And so when you start to anticipate and you start to expect, oh, I recognize this, that excitement prevents you from getting into cessation as well. So that longing that's there, the attachment to that arises, has to be 6R, has to be relaxed, has to be let go.
However,
thank you.
I think that there are still people who practice TWIM who also experience cessation without Nibbana. For instance, Doc Kraft writes about it in his book. He had many cessations that didn't lead anywhere. So I would think that this happens because even the experience of the cessation that happens is already being grabbed on before the Nibbana element can show itself somehow, right?
Yes. Yes, because a lot of times that delight that arises from that experience of cessation prevents that mind to be able to. So the anticipation right before, even if you let go of it, there's a seed of that anticipation that becomes or comes to fruition after cessation, which prevents the mindfulness to be able to see Nibbana.
I think that it's very difficult to not get excited. I mean, I think that I'm not able to do that.
Well, it's not uncommon, I'll say. I mean, I would say everybody who experiences cessation has an experience of Nibbana, are looking forward to it again. And it's this looking forward to it again that needs to be let go of. And so that allows the mind then to really see Nibbana, really see the links of dependent origination. Because you could have 12, 13, 14, 15 cessations. You become like a double arahant in that case, you know, I mean, if that was the case. But the difference there is those cessations didn't produce the experience of letting go. There was still an attachment there. There was still an identification there. So the key here is to let go, not expect anything, not anticipate anything. I mean, you have to come to such a deep level of disenchantment and dispassion that you really don't care. You really don't care. You just are, whatever happens, happens. Let's just see what happens. That's the mindset. That's the beginner's mind. I mean, that's why it's so much easier, let's say, to get into the stream, because the mind is a beginner's mind. And if you have that attitude throughout the process, you will make large amounts of development and large amounts of understanding because of that, because your mind isn't always looking for things. It's just clear, calm, collected, open, and then allowing the insights to arise when they arise. And because of that, you're able to start to see things and recognize things, but you don't hold on to the different factors, or you don't hold on to the different key signatures or the signposts that say, hey, now you're headed to station. Instead, notice those and you just 6R them and you don't care. So that deep level of dispassion needs to be present in the mind for it to really go into that correct form of cessation, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I have a little question about the consciousness.
Yeah.
This, as I understand, there are several kinds of consciousnesses, right? Nose consciousness, eye consciousness, ear consciousness. And now my question is, do we have them all also simultaneously, or can we always only have one consciousness at a time?
Simultaneously.
Simultaneously.
Because right now you're seeing me, you're hearing me.
Okay.
There is an arising of seeing the eye consciousness and the ear consciousness. But when I say simultaneously, it doesn't really mean at the same time, because you might see me first before you hear me. You know, light travels faster than sound and so on. But in other words, they're always arising in one way or another and passing away. So they are interwoven, let's say. So maybe suddenly a smell arises. Now there's the nose consciousness arising based on that smell. The contact between the nose and the smell, the odor, gives rise to the nose consciousness. But at the same time, you're seeing me. So the contact between the eye and whatever you're seeing is giving rise to an eye consciousness. And now you're listening to me. And so there's always consciousnesses arising and passing away. It's not singular, or it's not happening in a way that that it's not interwoven.
Okay, so even on a micro level, there can be consciousness at the same time, because I thought
they can crisscross, let's say.
Okay. Okay, good. Because I thought that it's just happening that quick, that it seems like we have like a several consciousness at the same time, but on the micro level, it's never at the same time. It's always like one after the other, you know, like arising and passing eye, ear, you know, like hundreds of thousands, and that's why it seems that it's simultaneously, but actually it's never simultaneously. But you're saying that even on a micro level, it can be simultaneously.
Yeah, I think I have to correct myself when I say simultaneous. I mean to say it's happening all the time, but it's happening at different speeds, and they might converge, right? They might crisscross. That's what I'm saying. They might interweave. Like the way you register color and form is faster than when you register sound, or when you register a nose, or when you register an odor or a taste. So I think when we say it's simultaneous, we're not referring to saying that they're happening all at the same time, but they're always happening, and they might converge at some point or another.
Okay. But so in the end, there's only one little consciousness at a time then?
Yes, at a time, there's always an arising and passing away of nose consciousness.
Just one and then the
that
other.
can crisscross. Well, yeah. So like, for example, when you're listening to me and when you're hearing me, there is just an arising and passing away of eye consciousness. And now you're also listening to me. So there's an arising and passing away of your consciousness, but it's not happening at the same rate. It's not happening at the same speed, so to speak, because you're registering more information in the form of light and form and color than you are when it comes to sound, when it comes to any kind of sound wave. So it all happens, whether it is eye consciousness, nose consciousness, ear consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, mind consciousness, one at a time.
Okay.
So in every microsecond, there will be a million or whatever, however we want to put it, arising and passing away, but it's all individually happening. There's one consciousness arising, and that same consciousness ceases, and then another consciousness arises, and another consciousness ceases.
Okay, so it's like maybe like two streams of consciousnesses?
Streams, there you go. Yeah. You could say they're streams, and they interact with one another, or they converge with one another depending upon the experience. And then once you cut off sound, that sound consciousness is no longer present, because there is no sound to contact with the ear. But if you close your eyes, there's no more visual consciousness, but you're hearing my voice, and therefore that consciousness is still continuing. The arising and passing away of different consciousnesses of sound are continuing.
Okay. Okay, good. Thanks.
Yeah, I have a question about dispassion.
Yes.
At the start of this retreat, I didn't realize, but I was watching the jhanas one-pointedly. Then I was corrected and started looking at the jhanas in the way that you're supposed to in TWIM, which is very advantageous, I suppose. But when it comes to dispassion, when I reflected back on watching the jhanas with one-pointed concentration, you know, my mind was jumping forwards, or, you know, I'm going into second jhana, I'm going into third jhana, I'm going into fourth, or whatever it might be. And I didn't actually realize it was really doing that at the time. But now I'm looking at the correct object in the correct way. I find that I am becoming less passionate about moving into different jhanas. It's still there a little bit, but I am coming like quite dispassionate now compared to the way I was. So would you actually say that the process of meditating with TWIM promotes dispassion or encourages dispassion in some way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When we talk about dispassion, we're talking about dispassion, yes, for the jhana factors or for the experiences and so on. But there's also this deeper level of dispassion that arises, let's say, at the 8th jhana or right after the 8th jhana, which is where there's an equanimity, and then there's the experience of disenchantment. And that disenchantment is basically, one way to put it is, you kind of get tired of the whole experience. It's not that you have aversion towards it, but it's like you've seen this, you've done that, and, you know, I've seen it before, so it doesn't interest me in the same way it used to interest me before. but it's not that you're bored of it. It's just there's a level of non-attachment to that experience now. There's a level of understanding. And so, okay, I've seen it before. I'm not as excited as I was before. And so I can just see it without having any personalization to that whole situation. I can see it without having any clinging to that whole experience. And then after that, there's a very deep level of dispassion, where the dispassion basically is, it's okay whatever arises. It doesn't matter whatever arises. Again, it's not indifference. Indifference would really mean that you're making an effort to ignore, or you're making an effort to prevent it from happening. And so that's the aversion. The dispassion we're talking about happens quite naturally as a result of seeing this over and over and over again. And so it's not, again, boredom, but it's just, oh, okay, I've seen this before. Okay, it's there. That's fine. That's okay. And so when you come to that level, then there's no need for the mind to cling to anything. And because there's no clinging, there is a letting go. And because there's a letting go, there's an experience of cessation. So TWIM definitely promotes dispassion, but we have to understand what kind of dispassion. It's a dispassion that doesn't cause indifference, or doesn't cause aversion, or doesn't cause a wrong sort of enunciation that could be ascetic in nature, let's say.
Right. So when I'm feeling, or when I'm experiencing, say, a jhana, and I start to think on one hand, oh, where am I? Because I'm starting to experience that I don't even know what jhana I'm in, because I'm not thinking about it. So I think, oh, where am I? And then I sort of think, well, I don't care. So that's actually a good sign.
Yeah. That is a good thing. That is a good sign. Yeah.
Oh, that's
I'm very happy to hear that. Yeah.
But needless to say, from your description of cake earlier, I know I'm not a arahant yet. If you put a cake in front of me, I will definitely want it. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Could you perhaps?
Any last questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a
please.
little question. Maybe it would be good to explain a bit about the difference between this dispassion before Nibbana arises and equanimity. Because there is a bit of a difference.
Yeah. So the equanimity that we experience is a very, very strong sense of balance. It becomes unaffected. So if it sees things arising that are positive or wholesome, or sees things that are not so wholesome and so on, it's balanced. The mind itself becomes so balanced that it remains unaffected. Whereas the dispassion is an experience in which the mind recognizes what's going on, and it's just a furthering or further strengthening of that equanimity, with the distinction that the mind is inclining towards Nibbana, or inclining towards letting go, inclining towards abandoning, quite naturally, meaning it doesn't force itself to have to let go of things. It's just naturally tending towards seclusion. So dispassion is sort of like equanimity squared, if you will. I mean, there is still a level of equanimity there, but it's also inclining towards letting go, inclining towards just abandoning and non-attachment, let's say. I think we can share some merit.
Yes, before we do that, I want to thank you all for being at this retreat. I hope it was a good experience for you. If you would like to do another retreat in the future, you are always free to do so. There are no special waiting lists. However, we do give priority to people who haven't done a retreat yet, but if there are spaces left, you are always welcome to join again. I would like to thank Delson and Koen and Kin and the entire Suttavada team for making this all possible. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Sil, for all the guidance that you're giving everybody.
You're welcome. Okay, let's see.
Yeah, I also want to thank you. It was a great retreat. Thanks, Sil and Delson and everyone involved. It was really nice.
You're welcome. It was a joy to give
Happy
it.
to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
And Ken, it's good to see you after so long.
Okay.
Yes, Delson, thank you. I needed this. Thanks for inviting me, Sal.
You're welcome. Okay. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.